What happens when Saudi Arabia and the rest of the BRICS say, listen, guys, we appreciate the last 50 years. We do. And protecting us. Thank you. But look, you signed an executive order to go green, right? And your lead economic advisor doesn't want you guys to be the world reserve anymore. So we've joined this organization with the majority of human population who produces the oil anyway. And we've decided to no longer take dollars for oil. Bang, just like that. And I've always looked at gold and silver in this respect as wealth. It, to me, is not an investment. It is wealth that, Keith, has outlived 2 world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, every pandemic, anything the world has ever thrown at it. And here we are, 5,000 years later, and the central banks of the world, who I will tell you not only are the most well-funded, but more importantly, more relevant, the most well-informed traders in the world. Not only has gold been reclassified the world's only other tier 1 reserve asset, but next to US dollars and treasuries in 2019 by the BIS, but those traders who know the playbook have bought more gold over the past 3 years than at any time in the last 100. And so what that tells me is that there's something big in store for gold and silver, because the world views it as wealth, as money that has no counterparty risk, money that can't be sanctioned or confiscated the way the US dollar can. And we have our brain dead Treasury Secretary gallivanting around the globe saying that we need to confiscate the $380 billion in Russian reserves to give it to the Ukrainian effort. When you cross that line of weaponizing the dollar, there's no coming back. The Southern Hemisphere will never trust us again. And what gold and silver are to me, Keith, is wealth that is not simultaneously someone else's liability. And with our actions, our behavior around the world, I think a lot of the accumulation, like by China, 17 straight months in a row, is due to the weaponizing of the dollar and the realization that if these countries end up on the wrong side, ideologically, of the United States, well, they too can have their assets not only sanctioned like we did to Iran, but confiscated like they're trying to do to Russia. And that's a very, very no thing to do for the world reserve currency. And I think it will spell ultimately the end of the dollar hegemony. We still have the dollar supremacy, but the dollar hegemony, not so much. And if you're not a friend of the West, well, watch out. And I think that's the way it's being viewed. And so to me, gold is, I think, and silver, to me, I look at it the way the central banks do, not to get wealthy, but because it is wealth. I've been saying this for 4 years, and I've kind of stuck my neck out for 4 years, and I've been right, which freaks me out. You go back and listen to the 4,000 YouTube videos I've done over the last 5 years, and I've been saying the same thing in every video, that the end of the dollar hegemony is coming, that the end of the petrodollar is coming. And I want to touch on a few things. Most people don't know that the lead economic advisor to the United States government is a man named Jared Bernstein. Mr. Bernstein has a degree in music and a master's degree in social work, but he is the lead economic advisor to the Biden administration. His entire thesis is losing the dollar's world reserve status. That is a privilege we can no longer afford. Now think about it for a moment. Could this be intended? As stupid as that sounds, think about it. What did Biden do right away? Well, aside from stopping and shutting down the XL pipeline, he signed an executive order to go green. And then we've weaponized the dollar against Russia, as we've just talked about, telling the whole world, you better be on our side or else. Now, as a world reserve currency, that is not something you should ever do. But think about it. What makes the dollar the world reserve currency? A lot of people don't know that. And for the benefit of your audience who haven't heard anything that I've talked about before, at the end of World War II, we took over for the pound sterling as the world reserve currency. And we told the world, all the governments of the world, you take our dollars, and anytime you want to trade them into gold, you can do so at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce, making the dollar as good as gold. And it was from 1944 until 1971, when President de Gaulle from France started to realize that we were printing more money to fund the guns and butter endeavor, the Vietnam War, than we had backing it in Fort Knox. And so he sent warships over to New York Harbor filled with dollars and said, please, we want our gold. And we gave it to him. So much so that we bled down over half of the gold that the U.S. held, and Nixon took the then very controversial step of closing temporarily, he said, the gold window. So you can no longer, if you were a government, exchange your dollars into gold at 35 an ounce. In fact, you couldn't exchange them for gold at all. We went back on our promise to the world. And it was 2 or 3 years after that, 73, that Henry Kissinger was dispatched to Saudi Arabia and struck a deal with the Saudi kingdom. We will protect you. No one will ever mess with you. We'll provide you munitions and assistance. But for that privilege, you, and by extension OPEC, will value oil globally in dollars. That's why it's called the petrodollar. We are the world reserve currency in essence, because every single country in the world has to stockpile dollars, creating this synthetic demand in order to buy oil. Now, go back to what I just said. Jared Bernstein thinks that's a privilege we shouldn't and can't afford anymore. Biden signs an executive order to go green, right? So what has Saudi Arabia done in the interim? Well, Saudi Arabia has joined the Belt Road Initiative, the largest infrastructure project in human history. 75% of human population, 50% of global GDP. They've joined the BRICS. They joined the BRICS New Development Bank. They joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the largest regional financial and military organization on the planet. And in Davos last year, told the world that they are open to accepting other currencies for oil. Why would they want to continue to sell their oil in dollars when they too can have their Forex reserves confiscated if they cross the line, where they too would have to own a currency that is being inflated away to the tune of $1 trillion a quarter in debt accumulation right now. And they too can put all of their excess reserves, which was a condition of the petrodollar. You take your excess and put them into U.S. treasuries. Well, how's that done for them over the last 2 years? Not so well. And so what I believe is happening is a transition away from the dollar as the singular, hegemony, world reserve status. Now, we still have the supremacy. Dollar still is 65, 70% of all transactions, but it used to be a whole hell of a lot more, and it will be a whole hell of a lot less. And I think when you realize that the BRICS went from 5 to 10, and another 36 countries have formally applied to the BRICS, the big meeting in October, as it is right now, they are already responsible for more than a larger swath of human population, a larger percentage of global GDP, 2 of the 3 largest nuclear arsenals on the planet, the majority of all the rare earth metals and oil and natural gas production. More commodities than we could ever hope of producing are controlled by the BRICS nations. Now, little by little by little by little, then bang, all at once. What happens if Saudi Arabia does what United Arab Emirates just did? What did the UAE do? Well, the UAE just joined BRICS right alongside of Saudi Arabia. They are the 7th largest producer of oil in the world and an OPEC producer, and said, we do not want dollars for oil anymore. Well, Iran has said that, of course. So has Russia, and now UAE. So 3 of the 10 BRICS members have publicly said it. What happens when Saudi Arabia and the rest of the BRICS say, listen, guys, we appreciate the last 50 years. We do. And protecting us. Thank you. But look, you signed an executive order to go green, right? And your lead economic advisor doesn't want you guys to be the world reserve anymore. So we've joined this organization with the majority of human population who produces the oil anyway. And we've decided to no longer take dollars for oil. Bang, just like that. Every country on the planet has the incentive to dump dollars. And when those dollars hit our shore in a massive tsunami of inflation, what do interest rates do to compensate for that inflation? They spike to the moon. Not something Powell would do, but something the market would do. And there's your Klaus Schwab Great Reset moment when stocks, bonds, real estate, the banking system, and the insurance companies are all inversely correlated to a massive spike in interest rates. And why would they want to incentivize the governments of the world to do this, right? Why? Well, we have 155 trillion in debt, of which 70 plus trillion is Social Security off balance sheet. 34 trillion on balance sheet, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, government, military pensions, all of this stuff. And we have 5 trillion in assets, according to the 2022 balance sheet, which the biggest asset being 1.6 trillion student debt. The largest asset of this country, the land of the free, the home of the brave, is student debt. We are so far indebted. We're almost at 130% debt to GDP. And I don't know if the country's ever come back from that when you cross that line, ever in history. So why do it? Well, my mentor, Richard Russell, always used to say 20 years ago that the Fed was so far down the rabbit hole, they have 2 choices: to inflate or default. Well, look at us now, accumulating $1 trillion a quarter in debt, a country that's shed its manufacturing base, a country that doesn't produce anything anymore. And if they realize that mathematically, no, when I say mathematically, 1 trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago, and we're 150 plus trillion in debt, when they realize that we're too far down the road and they have two options, inflate or default. How about option number 3? Find a villain. So you incentivize all of these countries to shed dollars, to unite under a common goal of pushback against the Western supremacy and hegemony and the coercion and the bombing. And, look, we went into Iraq 20 years ago. We're still occupying their country. 20 years later, we're sanctioning 14 of their banks for trying to trade with restricted banks to buy liquid natural gas. And they made $95 billion in oil revenue last year that we hold. They can't even direct it. And they asked us for $1 billion at the end of 23. We said, nah, not right now. So what did they do? Well, they said, we're going to kick all Western coalition forces out of the country. Trading in dollars, if you own a company in Iraq, is illegal. You'll go to jail and lose your business. And as of January 1 this year, there are no dollars left, green dollars in the country. All the banks got rid of them. So when the world looks at us as being hypocritical, well, we can go into a country under the guise of weapons of mass destruction and say, sorry, we made a mistake, but we're still there 20 years later, controlling things and sanctioning things. The world looks at us as hypocritical. The same country that just signed an executive order to go green, the same country that is weaponizing and talking of confiscating Russian Forex assets, and we are viewed as hypocritical. Now, if the country, Keith, if the country had its shit together, well, then I wouldn't be so worried. But look at what's happening in this country right now. Open borders where 12 million people have come in illegally. Questions surrounding the legitimacy of our elections, of the fairness of the judicial system, lawlessness in the cities. I mean, wokeness everywhere, divisiveness, black, white, red, blue, vaccine, no vaccine, you name it. You're defined by who you voted for. When we talk about gold and silver, this is not about getting wealthy. It is wealth. And it's wealth that's outlived everything the world's ever thrown at it. And what I see coming to me, and I've been right, and that's what scares me more than anything. People can go back and listen to what I was saying in 2019 and 2020. I've been saying this exactly. And when no one was talking about it. And if it happens, it'll be a religious experience that no one sees coming, except the very few people who are opening their eyes enough to understand that there are unintended consequences for the actions we take. But when you realize that the lead economic advisor wants this, well, maybe these consequences are intended. And the last thing I'll say before I shut up and listen to your questions is that the number 2 in charge at the White House for economic policy is a woman named Lael Brainerd, who spent time at the Treasury, and she was just number 2 at the Fed underneath Powell, but left and became the second in charge for economic policy. Now, she's a modern monetary theorist. She believes in unlimited printing. She just ran point with FedNow, which came out about 6 months ago. And for those of you who don't know what FedNow is, Google it. It's like Venmo or Zelle on steroids backed by the Fed. And over time, it will take the place of checks and wires, or instantly you wire money across or send money like you do on Zelle. And she also worked with MIT in development of the new CBDC that Biden fast-tracked by executive order. And so, well, what does she want? Well, she wants the whole system to blow up so they can come in and issue a new central bank digital currency. And it's a whole hell of a lot easier to reset a system when you can point to a villain, those sons of bitches who did it to us, than it is to say it was the brain-dead monetary policy of the Fed and the irresponsible spending addiction by the Treasury. We're sorry we screwed up. And when you realize that Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and government military pensions, the $100+ trillion, that's all owed to the American public. And if you realize that the central banks of the world have been selling treasuries for the past 2 years and buying gold, who owns all the debt? The American public has been going headlong into treasuries for the last year plus, chasing yield. The majority of all of the debt that we owe is to ourselves. Whole hell of a lot easier to say, we're sorry, but they did it to us. I know everything that you own was wiped out. Your stocks, your bonds, your real estate, your bank account, your insurance. Have no fear. Lael Brainerd is here with her new CBDC. Just sign on the line, Keith. Sign on the dotted line, and you too will be made whole with the new CBDC. Now, look, everything I said up until that point is factual. But what is it? Occam's razor, take the most logical example. If we really wanted to retain the privilege of being the world reserve currency, well, we wouldn't have weaponized the dollar. We wouldn't sign an executive order to go green. We wouldn't leave our borders wide open. We wouldn't have questions surrounding the Justice Department, surrounding the fairness of the elections. We wouldn't let lawlessness happen in our cities, and on and on and on. Now, the question I would simply ask people to think about, is this too stupid to be stupid? Is this intended? And I can't get away from it. I can't get away from the fact that either the people leading this country have their head buried so far up there, what, and they don't realize the consequences, or they know exactly what they're doing and realize that mathematically we've hit the end of the road. So better to point to a villain, and a big one, Xi Jinping and Putin and OPEC, for no longer taking dollars for oil and the whole world dumping dollars in treasuries, than it would be for us to default or to hyperinflate. Those are the only two choices the Fed has at this point.